Hey everyone, welcome to this week's episode of the Untrivial Podcast. I'm your host, Ali Nelson. Before we get into today's episode and guest, I just wanted to say thank you so much to everyone who has checked out the first two episodes. I really appreciate your support. It means so much to me that people have given this a listen, and I'm just so excited to share more with you. This week, my guest is Desiree Spierings. She is a Dutch relationship counselor and sex therapist practicing in Sydney, Australia. She has over 20 years' experience and is also the founder of Relationship Wellness. She believes everyone deserves a chance at a happy life with meaningful relationships and a healthy dose of intimacy. Today, we discuss all things conflict management in relationships, such as what triggers a fight, how to best handle triggers and surface issues in our relationships, how to gracefully receive criticism from our partner, what right fighting is and why we shouldn't do it, the age of our feelings, what parts of our brain are activated in conflict, and so much more. Desiree is such an amazing therapist, and I really enjoyed this conversation. So I hope there's a lot of wisdom and insight that she can bring to you. If you enjoy this episode, definitely send it to a friend, or in this case, a partner, if you and your partner are looking to improve your conflict management or just relationship overall. Thank you again so much for listening. Now let's get into the episode. Desiree, thank you so much for being here today. How are you?
Good, thank you. And thank you for having me.
My pleasure. I am so excited to speak with you today about all things relationships, conflict management. But before we get into that, I wanted to hear a little bit more about you and your background. Obviously, you are a relationship counselor and sex therapist. But, it's such a broad topic. There's so many different ways to approach these types of conversations. So, what would you say your approach or philosophy is when it comes to working with couples?
I guess when it comes to working to couples, I really believe that if we have two working people, we can do a lot. So if there's two couples or two partners willing to work on the relationship, I think it can go so much better. On the other hand, I also really stand for and fight for like good relationships and healthy relationships for all. Like I believe relationships bring a lot of happiness and well-being, emotional and physical well-being to a person. I think human beings are, they have this need to belong. And therefore, I think it's really important to provide people with the skills and the tools, I call them love skills for life, in order to make their relationships better and in order to make their relationships thrive. So that's kind of how I like to work with couples. I'm under the understanding that I think it's kind of interesting. If we're thinking about getting a driver's license, we might need to have many lessons, we need to practice, we need to study the road rules. But when it comes to go and get a marriage license, you can just walk in and get one. And I think, driving a relationship is a lot harder than driving a car. So I guess from that perspective, I come in to help people because I think we can make it a whole lot better.
Yeah, I totally hear you. I think providing people with those tools so that they can, work on it in their own time. Obviously, therapy or couples therapy might be 1 hour a week, if that. So providing people kind of those tools to take away and practice in their day to day is so important. And so much of what we're talking about today doesn't necessarily need to be in the context of a romantic relationship. Obviously, conflict management you can use with anybody, your friends, your partner, your family members. So we're really going to talk kind of broad conflict management, but obviously, romantic partnerships is one of those scenarios. I mean, let's start at the beginning. Like, what incites conflict? What's happening when somebody's getting triggered?
I believe what's happening is this, and this is going a little bit more scientific, but I try to talk about it in a bit more of a simple, easy to understand way. So I guess it's important to know that there are two types of brains. So we have the old brain and the new brain. The
Mm.
old brain is referred to as being the old brain or the reptilian brain because it's been with us for longer. So basically, it's been with us our whole life. So when we're born as a baby, we have this brain there with us because it protects us against danger. So what that means is that when there is something really in danger, we have to have the fight, fight, or freeze response there in order to kind of stay safe in life. So that's the old brain. Then there's also the new brain, and the new brain isn't fully developed until we are about 25 to 28 years of age or so. So much later. Obviously, it starts developing earlier, but it's not fully developed until that age. So the new brain lies in the frontal cortex, and it's responsible for reasoning, logical thinking, understanding the consequences of our actions, problem solving. So
Mhm.
it's the brain that we kind of want to tap into when we're in a conflict, when we're like talking about a difficult topic. We want to kind of problem solve and tap into that. The old brain, though, always stays with us because it needs to protect us still against real danger. So, obviously, if there's a fire here in my room, I can't just sit back here and go, where does it come from? Is it going to get worse? Who lit it? Should I go? Should I stay? I need to get up and run. So I need to get that old brain to take over any kind of thinking or logical thinking process. And I need it to protect me against that real danger in the world. However, what happens in conflict is that sometimes we start to feel a little bit unsafe and our old brain gets triggered, which means that we can't actually use this reasoning or thinking brain. And we then can't actually find good solutions to the problems because we start to get into that fight mode or avoidance mode, or like we run away because we are getting triggered and we start to get a bit flooded, it's called. What happens is if there's one partner that gets triggered in that conversation and the old brain starts to take over, the other partner also starts to get triggered most likely, like or often. And so what then happens is we basically have two 2-year-olds fighting, like two 2-year-olds having a tantrum. So that's obviously a bit of an issue when we're trying to resolve conflicts.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, and it would make finding a resolution harder if you're back into your two-year-old self, and so is your partner.
Yes. So just I think to add onto that is that you can only use one brain at a time. So basically when the old brain takes over, that thinking brain isn't on anymore. So it just takes over. It takes over the conversation and you can't actually tap into that so much. It's very much a physiological response as well. So what that means is that your heart rate goes faster, your breathing goes faster, and like it takes at least 20 minutes to calm that all down again and to swap brains again. So, what I highly recommend is that when you realize that you start to get triggered, is for you to actually then actually take that break and start to really just walk away from it and come back when you can swap brains again, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so automatic, you don't even realize when you're well on your way.
No,
It
that's right. That's right.
and then are some of the things, obviously, m maybe I'm wrong, but do people have different triggers or, like, different things in their brain that get activated, and does that come from childhood? Does that come from old wounds? Like, where are those triggers in that old brain coming from?
Yes, we do. So the common triggers, everyone has kind of common triggers. So it's good to understand that and to try to figure out for yourself where this might come from. Most often it comes from childhood. I often even say from the first 6 years or so. Often people don't remember much from their first 6 years, but often your upbringing is very similar from 6 to 12 as well. So going back to early years, try to understand your old wounds can be very useful in the here and now. However, it doesn't necessarily come up in a similar way. So the actual presentation of the problem is different. So you might be fighting about a messy house or dirty dishes, but actually it comes from a sense of feeling there's a disrespect. For example, I had a client where they had a very big issue with like messy households. So like, there was like dirty socks lying around everywhere and like, just like lots of paperwork everywhere on the
Mhm.
dining table. And she got very triggered by that. And when we went back to uncovering where this might come from, it did come from she was growing up in quite a volatile household. So there was lots of screaming, lots of hecticness, but especially so when they had to leave in early in the morning and it was very hectic and they couldn't find stuff. So like, if one child couldn't find their shoes, they got shouted at, and she got shouted at a lot too. So for her, having a messy household and not having that order is very triggering for her in the here and now. So even though the presentation might be slightly different, it's still the roots come from childhood very often.
Yeah. How do people begin to maybe explore uncovering those childhood wounds? It sounds like something that might be hard to do. Like, do you need to almost rely on your partner to tell you when they think you've been activated by something? Or what kind of self-work do you recommend to try and identify those?
Yes, I think it's very good to identify the triggers in the here and now. And I often break them up into like low triggers, medium triggers, high triggers. So,
Mm.
what are the common kind of things you fight about? And then try to find that link in your past. So, we're going from the here and now back to the past. I also think counseling can really help with that, obviously, trying to make more sense of that. Sometimes partners can help too, going, hey, I know that you grew up in this kind of household. Do you think it's got to do with that? So yes, I mean, there is like we can take a rounded approach when it comes to that. We're trying to uncover that. Very often, common triggers come back in terms of like it's a conflict that reoccurs. So it's a common conflict. And that's where I really like to go to the past. So not with little things like who does what in the household, but with the bigger things and where you might find that you're in gridlock. So
Mm.
if it keeps on reoccurring, then we might go back to the past and go, oh, what is this all about? Because there's something behind this. So it's not so much about the here and now and who does what. It goes a little bit deeper than that. Where it helps, if the partner understands where it comes from, it increases their willingness to cooperate and to take that kind of past pain away or to heal those wounds from the past. So it can help also for your partner to understand where it comes from because they go, oh, they're not being difficult about the paperwork. It actually triggers something inside my partner. And I want to take that pain away. I don't want them to feel triggered.
Yeah. Yeah. I also think it would help too, them knowing, this isn't necessarily a moment where they're, completely to blame. Like they've maybe rubbed up against something, but the root issue, it's so much deeper than them and that moment as well, which I think might be easier to empathize with and connect with when you don't feel like you're kind of enemy number one in those moments.
That's right. And I often say, our partners sometimes pay the price for our past. Like they're like,
Hmm.
yeah, they're now paying the price for those old wounds. But it's not about them. It's just that they're getting triggered in that situation. But the partner isn't necessarily to blame either. And I think looking at the past, like some people, I always think we can't use it as an excuse either. The work lies with you to for those wounds not to have the power to take over the year and to kind of give that a place. And that's where counseling could help, obviously, as well. And the way I describe it is like your past could be like your shadow. No amount of counseling can ever take it away. You're still going to
Hmm.
have that. You're going to have the same past. However, when we're thinking of a shadow, it will always follow you, wherever you go, but you lead the shadow. Whereas when it comes to when our past is still very much in the present and is affecting our day to day life a lot, it means that the shadow is starting to lead you. You're not leading the shadow. And that's where counseling can help to recognize hey, this is my shadow. This is part of my past. And I don't want that to take over in the here and now. I'm going to put it back in its place. It needs to sit there and I'm going to lead my shadow. So I think that's where counseling comes in, if that makes sense.
Yeah. What if, say you're with somebody and maybe you feel like they're, being led by this shadow or something's coming up for them that's from their childhood, but they might not know that yet about themselves or they haven't acknowledged that. What would you recommend?
It is really also about history taking. So where I often go is also to look at how they were loved. It's the storytelling. So I learn a lot from listening to clients' past and listening to their stories. So obviously we're often talking about significant events in life and then talking about that, and you can often quite clearly see a link.
Mm.
Another example might be, I had a client that, whenever they were running late, they got screamed at as well. Very similar to the other one. But in this case, it was just a running late. Like it was very important that you were always on time.
Hmm.
So now within herself, if she runs late, she starts to get really, really anxious. And then when a partner would say something like, "Are you ready yet?" it would really trigger her. So I think even just being aware of, hey, yes, I got screamed at, or running late was a really big thing in my past. Therefore, that link is here still in the here and now, but nothing's going to happen. Like, so having that self awareness is very important. I think when you're too much in it, it can be very hard to see. So I often say to people, we got to get out of the jar. So when we're inside the jar, you can't read the label. You need to get out to start reading the jar. And that's also where counseling can sometimes help, or where storytelling can help, or where going back to think about past events or significant events can be very helpful, or where you were hurt in the past or triggered in the past often still plays a role in the here and now.
Yeah. That made me think about repeating cycles versus breaking cycles. Because obviously, you hear, a lot about, a parent was a certain way, and then that creates a child who kind of follows a similar path of, you know, conflict or aggression or whatever it might be. Versus, there's children who come from a parent who might, be an alcoholic and they really want to avoid that or do something totally different. Does the way you handle your trigger have anything to do with repeating a cycle versus breaking a cycle? Are those connected at all?
I do think it's about making those healthy choices then. So when we start to, when the old wounds come up, it is about healing that and having compassion for that child, where and those wounds do not kind of go, I'm at fault, or being really harsh to yourself. So having that compassion for your past is very important. And on top of that, it's also about really choosing healthy ways to deal with our own pain. So, very
Mm,
often you can see when there is an unhealthy past, it's because parents in those cases dealt with their own triggers in an unhealthy way. So, they would either go and possibly have a drinking problem or an addiction, or, start having affairs, or there would be like, it would just be very toxic. So, for yourself to realize that I have triggers, it's normal, everyone has them, but now I choose how to deal with them, and I'm choosing healthy ways of dealing with that rather than unhealthy ways. So we can deal with our stresses in healthy ways. And again, their counseling could help, or even you yourself finding out what works for you. So for some people, it's meditation or yoga. For other people, it's going for a run, being a bit more active. So there's different ways. It's about feeding your body in a healthy manner. Whether if you feel like, oh, I get very triggered by the news, for example, then maybe it is about just identifying that and not bombarding yourself with all the negative news all
yeah.
the time. So it's just being very self-aware, but also then choosing more healthy options to deal with your own triggers. So it's very hard to take all the triggers away. We all have a past. It's also not about parent blaming. I think they did their best and they did the best they could. So it's very much about, hey, now that I have this makeup, I often call it operating system. We both come to the table, if you have a couple, you both come to the table with our own operating system. So it's really understanding how your operating system works, understanding how your partner's operating system works, and then work with each other rather than against each other. So very often we start working against each other. We're like pressing the buttons that actually we shouldn't be pressing. So it's about learning what buttons to press, but most importantly, also learning what buttons not to press.
Hmm. Yeah. So, in terms of how to bring up something that's bothered us in the right way? I know you mentioned pausing, taking a minute so that you can switch into that more mature brain, that prefrontal brain. What other steps could we take to make sure that we are voicing our frustration or concern in a way that's going to, be the most optimal and well received by our partner or the person that we're, fighting with?
Yes. So just to add on that a little bit, as I said before, when we get triggered in counseling, it's referred to as flooding. And the reason why it's called flooding is because there is no way that we're going to stay afloat, basically. So think about a boat starting to get flooded. That boat's going to sink. It's going to go down. So no matter what. So if you recognize that you yourself got triggered or your partner is getting triggered in that conversation, it's very important to call a timeout or to actually acknowledge, hey, I'm getting triggered or I can see you're triggered. Let's pause this. That's not pausing for a little minute. It takes 20 minutes for our whole brain to, or for our body to calm down, or at least 20 minutes, and for us to be able to swap brains again. So I would highly recommend not to try to continue, because it would possibly also trigger the other person if one person is triggered. And then again, you get those 2-year-olds having a tantrum. So really, if you want constructive communication at any point in time, we can get triggered. That's normal. It's about having an understanding that that can happen and not pushing to go forward in those moments. However, it's calling a time out plus rescheduling this. So the reason
Mhm.
why I say that's really important is because one person might start to feel like they're left hanging otherwise. They're like, they want
Yeah.
to bring up something important. And, the person that's trying to avoid this, they're just going to say, time out, or we're going to move on. But obviously, it's very important to say, okay, I acknowledge that this is a very important topic for you. I'm just getting really triggered here. But can we talk about this, tonight? Or can we talk about this tomorrow morning at this time? Is that a good time? Because, so it's just, and then having that understanding that, okay, we want this to be constructive rather than it leading to a fight or more destructive kind of conversations. So we have that respect for one another, respect to want to listen to the other person's concerns or to problem solve, but also to do this in a way that could be setting us up for success rather than failure, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of couples, there's like one person who wants to solve right away and another person who's like, please leave it alone. And then they marry each other. And that's always a little bit difficult. But I appreciate that, rescheduling or setting a time to talk about it is trying to aim at, meeting both needs, both, in my case, it's like my need, I want to solve it right away, ASAP. But, that's not always possible. Sometimes that can do more harm than good. And, giving my partner a bit of a breather, but knowing, they're not just going to completely avoid it, ignore it. It's not going to get dealt with. So I totally agree. I feel like on both sides, it's hard for both people when they have to rehab that conversation or when they have to delay that conversation. Um, but yeah, I totally see that as the right move.
And Ali, I think this is really interesting that you bring this up, because there are really two different communication styles. So, and it can be so useful to recognize that. So every couple that's a successful couple, or like a long-term couple, I should say, they have one partner with one communication style and one partner with the other. So recognizing that, and again, working with each other rather than against each other in those instances, can be so useful. So, one partner will be an energy maximizer, which so they want to talk about it. They want to talk about it more and more. If something happens, they need to process this and like really kind of process it together with their partner. So, I call them the octopuses. They're quite full on in their style. So, it could be even things like they have a flat tire. They straight away need to pick up the phone and talk to their partner about it. So the partner might perceive them as being a little bit full on, or like, demanding a lot, like always needing to talk about it, and talk about it more. So that is the octopus. And there's no right or wrong style, by the way. On the other side, we have the energy minimizers. So they're like, oh, there's a problem. Let's hide away in my shell. I call them the turtles. So they hide away in the shell. They go, oh, don't talk about it. Let's not talk about it. I don't want to hear it. And Actually, the turtles have a lot to say, but they need to process it for a bit longer before they're feeling safe to come out of the shell too. Like before they're able to voice what they're really thinking and saying. Also, they have a limit though. So sometimes, obviously, if you keep knocking on the shell, they can explode as well. But most often, we have the octopus going like this and the turtle hiding away in the shell. The problem is, the more the turtle hides away in the shell, the more the octopus goes like this. And the more the octopus goes like this, the more the turtle hides away in the shell. So that is what we need to work with so that we're able to, again, get a flow happening that's constructive in in that communication. In actual fact, it's a good thing. So as I said before, most successful or long-term couples that last a distance, they have one octopus and one turtle. So you can go and look at all your friends that are in a long-term relationship. There will be one octopus and one turtle. So it's a very common thing. The reason why that is because, there is no right or wrong style. The octopus is often the driver for change, so they make things happen. So if we have two octopuses, it will just be a bit too volatile. And if we have two turtles, nothing ever happens. So you need to have that turtle needs to have the octopus, and the octopus needs the turtle to do that. So how to come together and work with these styles is obviously the octopus needs to self-soothe a little bit more, and the turtle needs to come out of the shell, be more available so that the octopus could calm down a bit more. So it's about working with each other again.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. I'm an octopus for sure. Yeah, there's definitely a good handful of couples that I know who share that dynamic. Definitely. And I think it's interesting to, the focus on not only considering your need in the moment. I know you talk a lot about a concept called right fighting, and I was wondering if we could get into that.
Yes, of course. So what that means is that we often want to uh, get our point across in conversations. So we often want to say, but this is how I see it. And so I call that right fighting. We're fighting to be right. We're fighting for the win. And you might do that actually in a courtroom, right? There is one right and one wrong. However, when we're talking about couples, if there is one that wins, you actually both lose. So I often say, stop the right fighting and focus on finding a win-win solution, which is very different. Because what happens is your perception is your reality, but your partner's perception is their reality. So it's very important to understand each other's points of views and work with each other when it comes to finding solutions. So it's really about acknowledging that actually my partner isn't the problem. I'm not the problem. The problem is the problem, and it lies outside of the couple. When you realize that, you could actually talk about the problem and go, okay, no one is to blame here. No one is right and wrong. It's just different. And how can we find a solution that's going to work for those two differences?
Yeah. I think sometimes when someone's triggered in an argument and, one person feels hurt and they're upset and the other person feels like they haven't necessarily done anything wrong, it's almost like you're arguing to prove your point. And, maybe the person who doesn't feel like they are to blame doesn't really want to take that on, doesn't want to feel that. And the other person really wants the other to acknowledge that they've been hurt. But you like completely go away from solution finding to I want to show you why I'm right. This is exactly why I'm right and you're wrong. So I totally get that. It's like litigating and arguing for who's right versus remembering that you're trying to solve a conflict between the two of you. So I love that reframe of the problem is the problem and neither of us are wrong or the issue at hand.
Yes, I think that's right, Aline. I think if you start fighting, like it's really like you're not on each other's team. You're the same team. So if one wins, you both lose because it's a loss for the team. So I think sometimes we forget that we're on the same team when those things start to happen. Also, it's very important to take a step back sometimes to realize there is a communicator and a listener. And when you're listening, so often we listen to reply. because we feel maybe a little bit triggered. So the other person says, "Hey, you never do the dishes, and how dare you don't do the dishes?" So the other person goes, "Hey, hang on a minute, I am doing the dishes." So they feel blamed, they feel attacked, and they want to defend themselves because they're like, "That's not right. I did the dishes yesterday." So again,
Mhm.
they're actually listening to defend themselves or listening to respond. So I often encourage people where we need to listen to understand, not listen to reply. And you're getting a different listener. So it's really important that we turn take in conversations where there's one person that brings something to the table and the other one really tries to listen to what that's all about for their partner. So I think it's important to take that step back a little bit to go, okay, what are we doing here when we're talking about something? We really need to have listening skills and communication skills, constructive listening skills and constructive communication skills. And we get a whole lot further.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. What would you say to someone who views compromise maybe as like losing out a little bit on what they want or not being kind of aligned to, what they maybe were initially, wanting from their partner and seeing compromise as like a loss?
Yes, very good question. Because this is how I see it in general. It's not so much to do with communication, because in communication, I think we can get to a win win solution. But let me answer this in more in general. So if you are on a journey in life, you're in a boat, and the boat is going to take you on this journey. When you're single, you get to decide where you go, where you steer your boat, how you're doing it, what needs you want to get met, when you want to go after them. You just steer that boat to your north, to your life vision, the way you want it, how fast you want it, anything. However, when we're in a relationship, we have significant others in that boat. So we invite significant others in the boat. What that means is that where like it's not just us in the boat steering that boat, and the life vision that we've got needs to become a shared life vision. It's the things we both want, right? It's a life that we both want.
Mhm.
So obviously from the beginning it's important to recognize, do we agree on the main things here? Because, we can't have one boat wanting to go that way and the other wanting to go that way. We're on in the same boat. So that shared life vision should kind of match a little bit. So knowing where we're going, right? That's very important. The other thing, though, when it comes to life, if you want all your needs met, or to relationships, if you want all your needs met, stay single. Because then it's basically you can do whatever you want, right? But if you
Right.
want to, have a significant other there with your boat, it is about like also acknowledging what they're needing and trying to meet that along the way on that journey, right? And so what I often say is that we sometimes need to make decisions for the greater good. Yeah. So that means the greater good for everyone in that boat. It might not even just be you and your partner, it might be you and your partner and all your children in the boat. So then again, we can't just always go after even what the partner's needs are. Sometimes we need to make concessions for the greater good. So, for example, sometimes I see people where their child got really sick or something there, and the boat need to go, of course, right? Because it's for the greater good. It's not just about our needs anymore. It's about
Mhm.
everyone's needs, and we need to make compromises for the greater good. What's best for all in our boat? And I often go back and look at that. Yeah. It is important, though, that we stay true to ourselves. So, because the compromises cannot become sacrifices. So, there is that line. You're going to have to make agreements along the way. And whenever you make an agreement, I do want you to reflect and go, do I stay true to myself here, or am I really giving up too much of myself by agreeing to that agreement or to that solution? So, self sacrifices means, you know, sometimes I see people, and there's one partner studying a PhD, and later on in life, they have made that sacrifice of stopping that study to look after the children, and they felt that that partner really wanted them to stop the PhD. Even though the partner might say, no, 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 I never asked you to do that, they might still felt like they
Mhm.
had to stop that, or they couldn't go after their career, or they couldn't. What then happens is along the way, as you go on that life journey in that boat, what then happens if you make too many sacrifices, self-sacrifices, or secret sacrifices, I call them, because you may have agreed to something that really doesn't sit well with you. Then what happens is it leads to a lot of resentment. And later on in counseling or in therapy, when that then comes up, we first have to untie all of those knots. So I look at resentments as being knots. And over time, if there's a lot of them, it becomes a really big knot. And then we have to do a lot of work on untying these knots, if that makes sense. So make sure that we're making decisions for the greater good, not self-sacrificing, but it be a compromise for everyone in your boat.
Yeah. And like both people might be giving up a little bit of what they want, and less so one person giving up nothing and the other giving up almost kind of everything, maybe in that agreement. So,
That's right. And the other side of that, I think, is also when you're going there, it's like together though, it's better than without each other. Like, yes, you can go and meet
yeah.
your own needs and stuff like that. But when you find that significant other, looking at like, well, the life that we provide in our shared life vision, it's even better. So overall, it should be even better, obviously. Because I don't look at them as sacrifices or compromises, but just kind of like, okay, we need to make some little compromises for the greater good, but overall, our life is better together than it was on my own.
Yeah. Overall, it's still a win.
It's still a win.
Yeah.
Exactly. Overall, it's still a win. Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. Almost looking to just past that very particular, argument or conflict, and looking at the long term of it, and how much does this matter in the grand scheme of things, kind of keeping that keeping you grounded and framing things the right way too.
That's right. Yeah.
Mhm. You talk a little bit too about the age of your reactions, like how old a reaction is. And I know that there's three: there's a wounded child, the unstable teen, and the functioning adult. Can we talk a little bit more about that?
Yes, I think sometimes it's good to question. Like, so again, I try to sometimes give people tools to look at their own behavior and start seeing it for what it is. So by questioning how old is my reaction here, am I reacting as the wounded child? Am I reacting as a, unstable teenager or an angry teen? Or am I actually working here as a constructive adult or functioning adult? It's very important to ask yourself that because you can recognize it. So the wounded child might just be crying in the corner, can't cope, completely helpless. They need a partner to always pick them up, and they're unable to cope as a functioning adult. They're just like destroyed by whatever is happening. So it's hard to work with a partner like that because you don't need an adult on the other side. You need a wounded child. The other side of that is we can sometimes be an adaptive teenager or an unstable teenager, which means we fly off the handle, we slam doors, or we have destructive behavior like drinking too much just to avoid any kind of constructive
Mhm.
conversation. So, being a functioning adult means, hey, something's happening, I don't really like it, but I can talk about this constructively. And again, also, or my partner is having an issue here. I'm not going to fly off the handle or cry in a corner. I'm open to listen here and be someone that can work with that and to hear pros and cons and workshop this to find a better solution. So that's being a functioning adult. And the reason why I sometimes mention that is because it can be very recognizable and then people can stop themselves in their tracks.
Yeah. Is it possible to have a trigger that comes from maybe a childhood wound, but you still want to respond like that functioning adult? So I could be triggered by something that is quite sensitive to me from my childhood, but the way I actually react or approach the situation is kind of determining my maturity and kind of approach in terms of how I handle the conflict. Is that fair to say?
That's right. And again, that requires those skills or tools, right? So we sometimes we don't learn this at the communication tools or skills. We don't learn how to communicate or constructively. So we often go and resort to our old ways or what we've seen our parents do. Or so it's not about, again, blaming the other person or identifying, look how bad you are, or judging them. That's not my intention by mentioning this. It's really to go, hey, I think we can do better. I think we need some tools here. I recognize you're not responding here. You can't stay present in the conversation. Let's try to see, and if we are learning these skills, let's see how a difficult conversation about a sensitive topic or even easy ones can go a lot more constructively.
Hmm. Yeah. Do couples that you see have maybe common arguments that they're getting into? Like, are there like a top few comment conflicts that you're seeing in your clients and in your work?
Definitely, there are definitely common problems. Sometimes, though, again, if we're talking about communication per se or conflict, the problems can be one thing, but it could be that the trigger is about something else. So, for example, sharing the load is a common one. Trust issues are common. These are just examples. Also, lately, it's very much about how to do life or make life happy once the children have left the house, or like how can we still stay connected throughout a lifetime of togetherness. So there's maybe some stuff that happens around that as well. Finances could be one. The problem is, though, sometimes that's just the problem. So if I look at sharing the load, it's really that, one is doesn't have enough bandwidth to look after her own well-being because she's taking on too much. Then we need to address, obviously, that specific topic. And it will help to learn communication skills along the way, but it's also really about that problem. Or if it's trust, we might actually need to teach the couple how to earn trust coins and how to do that. So those are very big topics in itself that sometimes really need to be addressed. And it's not about how we communicate about that. It's really about the fact that they have a problem with those areas. However, when we're looking at communication or fights, often almost all fights are about one thing. So that sounds a bit strange, but that's really making it simplistic. And then there is obviously a place to address those different topics more at length when a couple is suffering or is dealing with those specific topics. But when we're looking at conflicts, often it's about a fear of emotional disconnection. Yeah. So what that means is these couples might always be testing, how much are you available to me and how much are you not? And they assign their own meaning to a certain situation. So, for example, someone isn't doing the dishes, like, and someone has an issue with that. It could be that they're taking on too much of the load. And then we need to address that for sure. And there's a lot that we need to do about how to share the load fairly. And that's a whole big topic.
Hmm.
However, sometimes it's the meaning they assign to it that I look at when it comes to if they have regular conflict over it. It might also be a meaning they assign to it. You promised to do the dishes, you're not doing it. So they're testing that availability. You're not available for me. And then it comes to the meaning they assign to it. If you really loved me, you would have done those dishes for me.
Hmm.
So that's the meaning they assign to it. Might not be the partner's meaning at all. They had to run off to soccer because they had a soccer practice and they're like, I'll do it later. It had nothing to do with not loving them. But this is how sometimes we take it. So being aware of that and actually, again, taking yourself out of that jar and reading the label and trying to be aware of the story you tell yourself about this could be very useful as well.
Yeah. You brought up fear of emotional disconnection, and that made me think a little bit about attachment style and, insecure attachment style. Do you think attachment style affects the type of conflict or type of issues that come up in conflict for couples?
Yes, could definitely be. So if we're thinking about attachment style in in relationships, it can sometimes be useful to look at this. So someone who is secure can often deal with conflict very well because they're not going to question the relationship status. They're not going to feel insecure about, is my partner coming or going? Is she loving me or he loving me enough? So it's more about we're having a problem, I can deal with that. They're open to talk about it. They're open to brainstorm ideas, and they don't take it personally even. So they're feeling quite secure about their attachment in the relationship, or they've got a secure attachment in the past and therefore feel okay and solid. I often refer to them as the anchor. So whatever comes at them, they stay stable and they can carry that. Then we have an anxious person, and what happens often in communication, they might feel a little bit stressed or anxious about the attachment, about how secure the relationship is. So what they need is they need more reassurance. Again, they're like, that might be that person about the dishes, right? Going, oh, I feel a little bit like you're not doing the dishes. So are you still here for me? They're testing that because they're anxious about that. And they need that reassurance more and more. If they're paired with someone who is secure, they will get that. They can come there and the secure partner will make them feel secure. But in terms of their communication, what you often see is that they either want to talk a lot about it and want to go over and over it again, or they sometimes it resorts in anger a little bit more. They're tapping into an anger
Mm.
style a little bit more easier than other attachment styles. The other side is the avoider. So that is where you they're like conflict avoidant really. They're like, oh, there's an issue, let's not. They also have issues in committing, but they also don't really like any kind of conflicts. It makes them feel unsafe and they're like avoiding all of that. So if you pair an avoider with an anxious one, we get like the opposite of what we really need, if that makes sense. Yeah. So
Yeah,
that's where it
not a
becomes
good
maybe it
pairing.
just that's right. It just adds an extra layer of it making it more difficult. But again, with constructive communication skills, I think you can deal with it will help both people to come to the table with constructive tools.
Yeah, even if one is a push and the other's a pull, if you learn the tools, you can kind of soften on both sides. And lucky if
That's
you're
right.
secure or have a secure partner. they're
Yes, it
they're
is.
safe no
Yeah.
matter what.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit too about, your practice, being a relationship counselor. Obviously, you're dealing with couples every day. Are I think a lot of women are really curious about their relationships, and I think, just from statistically, they're more the person who wants to talk about the relationship and assess the relationship. Are men maybe more reluctant to come see you in couples therapy or open up with you in couples therapy? Because I could understand maybe a fear of, you know, a spouse and then a therapist agreeing that someone has done something wrong, and maybe there's that fear of being ganged up on. Like, how do you manage that fear if you experience it, and do you see that?
Yes, I do. Sometimes I call it like there's one partner of the couple, the prisoner. So they're like dragged in there and they're feeling a little bit like, oh, I had to come and I had no choice. So obviously we need to work with that. I need to be a little bit more softer around that. It is also like men in general, and also the research shows that they're a little bit more hesitant in terms of getting help, and it's not always the case. So sometimes they're the one that are, crying for help and go, "Just help me! Like, what can we do? Like, or how can I make it better?" And I really want that. So it's not always the
Mhm.
case, but definitely often men are a little bit more hesitant in general to go to a GP or to look after their well-being. So that's definitely the case. The way I work with it is I go a little bit more softer on the one that was a bit less willing. So I look at two things in therapy: willingness. So, willingness to really work on the relationship and to learn new skills and to be part of this counseling process. And then I look at ability. So, and willingness is the main thing. So, if we're both willing to put in the work, to put in the right actions, we can really fly and it can get so much better. But if the willingness isn't there, like there isn't much we can do. So I need to kind of, when I work with someone who doesn't really want to be there, it's also looking at them and see what they could get out of it. What would be of benefit for them so that we can increase that willingness for them to be more of an active participant in the process.
Yeah. Do you think there's anything people misunderstand about couples therapy or get wrong, maybe in kind of broad opinions about it?
Yes, I think sometimes there is a fear of coming in. So also like it's like, what is this all about? Or it's a sign that something is really bad, that our relationship is really bad. And I'm often thinking, oh, I wish like, and this is also often what I hear from my couples. They're like, oh, we wish we saw you like 10 years earlier because it would have prevented so much. So
Yeah.
you know, I guess once that resentment has built up, once you've got all those nuts in the stomach, we have to do a lot of undoing of the past pains and the wounds, and preventing is so much better. So I encourage people to come in sooner rather than later because, if you've got the right skills, you can prevent a lot of pain and hurt along the way. So that is definitely one thing I think is important to acknowledge. And I think people are a little bit fearful of what I'm going to suggest, maybe because I give a lot of homework. I feel like just talking to me for an hour isn't going to make a difference. It's really what you do with that. So, and I
Right.
always say to people, you have to feel safe with that. And I work with them. So I really look at what's useful for this couple or this person. And then also, I always check, do you feel okay doing that? So, they don't have to fear the work either. It's very simple and easy, but it can make a massive difference.
Mhm. Do you see a lot of couples coming in later on in their marriage or in their relationship, or do you see people who are trying to approach it from more of that preventative or maintenance standpoint?
I see both, definitely. But yeah, like, and I think lately there's been a bit of a shift in terms of people wanting this help and it being more normalized. So that's a very
Mhm.
positive shift, I think. And they're recognizing the fact that, oh yeah, if we know the skills, it can be even better. I also think there's a shift in there used to be a lot of people coming in and needing help around survival skills in terms of like, how do we deal with finances? How do we deal with like really the crises of life?
Right.
Whereas now people kind of want to do so. I look at them as being this practice of bracket of survival. How do we do life better with each other? The other side of it is also like the play. How can we play better together? How can we have more fun? How can we have more happiness? How can we make sure that we have this emotional and physical intimate connection with one another for the rest of our lives? Like it's not just from 0 to 40, it's from 40 to 80 as well.
Right.
So how can we keep that connection alive? And I see a lot of couples coming in for that as well. So not just crisis and how to deal with like difficult topics or problems, but also to keep the spark alive, to keep the fun alive, to keep the play alive. And I think that's quite a nice shift, actually.
Yeah, that sounds so positive. I feel like
Mm.
with the reduction in stigma around mental health in general, well-being, therapy in general, it's so great to hear that it's happening in the couples therapy space too, just because yeah, I definitely have talked to people in some older generations who, they would never admit going to couples counseling or even wanting to do that because it's so almost shameful in their age group. Whereas, the way I see it and a lot of my friends see it is, oh my god, I want to get ahead of this because I want my relationship to be so successful. I want it to last. I want it to be the best it can be, and it's more just like trying to get the most you can out of it with all of the tools and the resources that are available to us. And couples therapy is just one of those great tools.
That's right. That's right.
Mhm. Do you when you see people as couples, do you recommend that they see therapists individually as well, or you kind of keep it in the couples space?
No, I think very often there's also a need for it to be split up a bit. Sometimes they come in and already have their personal therapist, and I think that's great. And the reason why is because if you understand yourself better, you can bring that to the relationship. So I often say, people can't smell or mind read, or your partner can't smell or mind read what it is that you need, long for, want, desire. You actually have to tell them. But
Mhm.
sometimes they themselves don't know what they need, long for, or desire, or, want. So it is also about that self growth and self knowledge, understanding your past and your past pain. So you can then bring that into the couple and explain that to your partner in a calm manner. It's about taking ownership and responsibility for your own well being too. Like you can't always expect your partner to take it all away. So I definitely think there is a place of also addressing your own personal stuff because it can also really benefit the couple.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. What are some maybe daily or weekly practices that, couples or individuals can do to strengthen their relationships? Do you have any like hot tips?
Yeah, what tips? Yeah. So many, so many. I think, are we talking about conflict resolution or are we talking about like just in general? Ali, like,
Let's
what
do
is it that
both.
you let's do both. Okay, good. So I think when it comes to conflict resolution, as I said before, we have a communicator and a listener. So when we communicate, I think if you have something that you want to bring up, like a sensitive topic, I think it could be very important to first think about when you're going to say this. So if you're already kind of in a fight about something, don't think that that would be the best time to bring up something about like a sensitive topic or anything like that. So actually plan it. Plan your day and time when you're going to bring something up. Also tell your partner about that. So for example, if you're dealing with a turtle and you spring something on them, they're going to hide away and you're not going to get anywhere with that conversation. So if you give them a bit of space and time to know that, hey, tonight we're going to talk about this thing, that will possibly help them too to kind of process things from their end and to bring more to the table for you as well. So I think it's very important not to spring things onto your partner if you want to bring up something constructively. It's
Hmm.
about planning it, setting a date and time for it where we're both ready to hear it. When you then start to talk about it, so again, talking about the talker, the one that brings the information, I think it's very important to soften your startup so that you're not straight away dive into it and go, you do this and you do that, and like this is wrong, and that's not going to go anywhere, right? We're there, we're with our partner, we're with our lover, not our enemy. Sometimes we forget that in the process when things get heated. They're our partner, we're on the same team. So soften your startup is so important because also it reassures your partner that you're not angry with them, you're not going to attack them because they're just going to armor up and go, ooh, and they're going to get triggered if we're bringing it up like that. And again, remember, it's not going to get you anywhere if your partner is triggered. They're not going to use their new brain. They're not going to have their thinking logical brain on, and you're not going to find a solution. So have a very soft startup, very important. So an example of that could be like mentioning kind of three things. First of all, is talking about how you feel talking about it. So you could just say, I feel a little bit anxious about bringing this up, or I'm a little bit embarrassed about what I'm going to say. Or so having that kind of calms it all down straight away. Secondly, you then can ask what it is you would like from your listener, from your partner. So while you're talking, so you could say, I would really like it if you could hold my hand while I'm talking. Or if you could first listen to my side, and then I would be very willing to listen to your side. So again, it's a way of
Mm.
introducing that topic, not straight away diving into the problem. And then last but not least, it's also giving a security statement. So sometimes when we're really angry, we like the other partner starts to feel a little bit insecure about the relationship. And especially if we've got someone with an anxious attachment style on the other side, they're going to go, oh,
Hmm.
they're not loving me anymore. And they're going to not feel great and they're going to get triggered. Again, it's not going to go anywhere. Sometimes even I see couples doing this. They're not just like voicing their problem, they're also, when they're starting to fight, throw the out card, saying, if that doesn't get better, I'm going to leave the relationship. I mean, that should never even come into it. So, actually giving your partner a security statement, it shows that we're feeling solid and good about the relationship. Has got nothing to do about that. Don't worry about any of that. I'm on your team or teammates here. I just want some help solving this together. So that way, you actually identifying that you're teammates. So that could look like something like that. Like, I'm struggling with this, but I really like your help with this. And I really like us to get even stronger. I feel so good about our relationship right now. I want it to get even better. That way, our partner on the receiving end, the listener, is going to really calm down and really be able to hear you better if you do that soft startup. So, those are my tips to start with that. When it then comes to talking about it, in terms of voicing the problem, I definitely recommend you to practice this first, to think about what it is that you actually want to say. So this is not going to be just a burbling on thing that throws everything in there. You're talking about one topic and you're actually voicing it in a loving, skillful way. And there's different skills we could use there. But one big tip I've got for that is to mention your longing and not your problem. So what that means is, instead of pointing out, oh, there's always all these dirty dishes in the sink, or I hate that you leave these dirty dishes in the sink, that is not the way. That's just mentioning the problem. We actually don't need to mention. You could just mention your longing. And the longing, I often say, make it even more global. So identify your triggers. Where does it come from? So you could say something like, I'm longing to be in a relationship where we equally share the load, or where I feel very respected. And so that way, that's your longing. So by doing that, your partner will probably go, oh, yeah, of course, I want that too. Or totally understands. Ah, okay, great. And
Yeah.
also the other thing is, so often we dump something on our partner's lap, but for them to come up with a solution, you think about what the solution is. It's your problem, identify your own solution and bring that to the table. So you could say, I think what will really help with that is that if we could make nights where you do the dishes and I do the dishes. So 3 nights you can do it, I can do it the other 3 nights, and maybe one night we can do it together. So that way you bring the solution to the table, and your partner doesn't have to go, oh, how can I solve all this? How can I make sure that he or she feels more respected? I don't know what to do here. But you're bringing that there, and then see, they can either agree with that, or it's just a starting point to then brainstorm further ideas of how to do that even better.
Yeah. Is there any tips for someone who might be on the receiving end of all of this communication?
Yes. So that's the listener. So as I said before, there's those two roles. If you're the listener, I have a lot of tips. First of all, it's about, we're not listening to reply. We're listening to understand. So your only job to listen is to look around the corner and understand your partner's perception. Again, your partner's perception is their reality. Your perception is your reality. But you need to understand, your only job is not to convince your partner of your perception, it's to understand theirs. So adopt a really great dose of curiosity and bring that to the table. So where you go, okay, I'm really curious about your side. What is this all about? Why do you need me to do the dishes? Like, what is it? What's behind it? Where does it come from? So if you bring that kind of dose of curiosity to the table, where you don't feel attacked, but actually try to see around the corner and see what this is all about for your partner, I think the conversation will go a lot more constructively. The other thing is really then to maybe even mirror back what it is that your partner is saying. I hear you say that you like to feel more respected in the relationship and you'd like me to take ownership of doing a few nights of the dishes. I get that because of A, B, C, and D. I understand where this comes from. So you really try to make sense of what they're saying. If your partner goes all wrong because they haven't listened to this podcast or aren't learning any skills to communicate things better, and they might dump the problem onto your lap and go, how dare you never do the dishes? Your job as the listener is try to find the longing behind the problem. So what are they longing for here? Wait, remember what I said, what Desiree said in that podcast? It wasn't about the problem. It's something behind it. What's their longing? Oh, maybe it's about respect. Maybe it's about them feeling like things are shared equally or fairly. Okay, let me find the longing behind it. I can do that. I can work with that, because that will prevent you from getting triggered, because you don't necessarily feel blamed. You understand it's about your partner and their levels of emotional turmoil or inner turmoil, and understanding and looking. So it's like you're turning into a detective, trying to find the longing behind the problem.
Oh, I love those tips. That's so true. I think, yeah, as a listener, one thing that's helped me in my listening moments is the question of, how are they right? Like, even if their reality or their perception doesn't match mine, what are the ways, what are the specific things they're saying that I know are correct? It might not be everything, but there's definitely some things that can help me like better wrap my head around it. And also not arguing about whether or not their perception is valid or not. Like, at the end of the day, their experience is their experience. There's no right and wrong. in that experience as a whole, and like you can't debate that. It's now kind of turning your focus to those solutions, and I love that kind of curious approach, but also digging in on that longing. I don't think I've done that one before, and I definitely want to take that tip and kind of use that to maybe pinpoint where my partner might be coming from in the future. That's a great tip.
Yeah, and it's true. I always say, ask yourself, how might they be right?
Yeah.
So even if you don't agree, like, how might they be right? It's also not about agreeing with them. It's understanding that for them, that's their truth. So
Mhm.
it is really about understanding more about their truth. Be curious about it. So ask questions like, why do you see that way? Or can you please tell me more? Oh, that's so interesting. I need to understand that better in order to be a better partner for you, because at the end of the day you want to have a happier life together. You're, as I said before, you want to be able to help them and take their pain away, or be a better teammate for them. So it's about that in every conversation. So bringing it to the table skillfully but also listening skillfully can really help on both ends. In general, I think the golden rule in relationships is this. There is a common saying, and it says you need to treat others the way you want to be treated. I say in relationships, it's a big no-no. You shouldn't be treating your partner the way you want to be treated. You need to treat your partner the way they want to be treated. And then if they do the same to you, you'll both be very happy. It's continuously feeding the relationship. The relationship, it's like a flower that you need to continuously grow and feed and give,
Mhm.
because that way it can blossom year after year, season after season. So treat your partner the way they want to be treated. In order to do that, you need to understand how that is. So really ask these questions, be curious about how that is, and give them what it is that they need, not what it is that you need.
Oh, that's so great. I feel like this has been such a great conversation. Desiree, where can people find you and learn more about you if they want to connect more?
They can find me on my website, relationshipwellness.com, or on my Instagram account. I guess that's possibly an interesting one, as I answer some questions, and there will be more information and little tips there for you. So that's at relationship.wellness. Yeah, you're also very welcome to ask me any questions there if you want to know more. So I'm very happy to answer them or cover them in my posts as well. So I've also got an online program, and the reason why I started doing that is because so often in the sessions with me, couples say, "Oh my God, I'm going to tell all my friends about it. I wish I knew this earlier." And I wanted to make the love skills for life, available to all. So this way, it's very accessible because you could watch it in the privacy of your own home. Also, if we're talking about those men we were talking about earlier before who might feel a little bit anxious about coming in to see a counselor, this takes that all away. It takes away a lot of those barriers, because you could just watch it on your own laptop. You could do it with your partner, or you could do it on your own to learn more of these love skills. So the overall program is called Better at Relationships, and you can find that on my website at relationshipwellness.com. And it covers 5 topics. It covers how to stay more connected throughout a lifetime of togetherness, so better at connecting, better at communication, how to, what communication skills can we apply to get better at it, like what we talked about today, and way more skills and tools and tips around that. It will cover a better at being a team. So that's sharing the loads, building really strong, trustworthy bonds, how to be better at feeling like a strong alliance between two partners throughout a lifetime of togetherness. And then there is dealing with pain and hurt. So better at dealing with conflict, or dealing with forgiveness or apologizing, and having a bunch of resilience. So, or how can we increase our resilience when issues come to the table? And last but not least, it's better our physical intimacy. So how to keep the spark alive, how to spice up our sex life. Those kind of things will be covered in that. You can also buy the program as the different topics. So if you feel like that's my main topic, you could just tap into that. You don't have to buy the entire program. So they're all available, 6 in total. So if you like, you can have a look and see if it's interesting to you.
That's amazing. That sounds like such a comprehensive and valuable resource for anybody in a relationship. So check it out, everyone. Thank you so much, Desiree. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed the guest portion of this episode, and welcome to today's solo moment. So obviously we're talking all about therapy, couples therapy, fighting, conflict, and repair in relationships. And I wanted to talk a little bit about couples therapy because I think it's such an amazing tool that we have, that I think maybe people are anxious about, or there still might be a bit of stigma around. And so I just kind of wanted to dispel a bit of that or give some reassurance if maybe some of you are thinking about couples therapy, are interested in exploring it, but maybe haven't taken that step yet. So, I personally have been to couples therapy a good deal of times, and it's not in situations where you think. I don't think people use it the way maybe it used to be used, where I don't know, maybe the impression is that your relationship is hanging on by a thread if you go to couples therapy, or you're working through something really horrible if you go to couples therapy. And that's just not the case. And I think a lot of people are wanting to become more and more proactive in their relationships and avoid divorce, avoid conflict as best they can, try and prepare themselves for the reality of relationships, which is that they are hard and they are two people coming together trying to make life work in probably the most intense way, especially when you add living together, if you add children, when you add life stressors, it can be really challenging. And so, why not take advantage of a resource that's available to help you both better understand one another or better connect with one another? For me personally, I got married last year, and my then fiance, but current husband, and I wanted to go to couples therapy to make sure that we had all the conversations we thought were important before entering a marriage. So, think what couples typically fight about in marriage: finances, domestic labor, child rearing, religion, expectations, intimacy, like you name it. We had this amazing workbook that we used with our therapist where it was a really well thought out exercise kind of for each of those categories. And we would go in and answer all these questions and then talk them through with each other. And so it really helped make sure that where we were aligned, we knew if there were any misalignments, we talked them through to really like get to the core of what would be best for us and then talk those through in therapy. And it was so fun and really eye opening and a great exercise to make sure that, you know, as we're going into this marriage, we've tried to uncover as many stones as we can before entering the reality of that stage of life. And so that was a really good exercise. I think the other thing couples therapy is really great at doing and helping with is helping you both hear one another better. Because I think sometimes in conflict with partners, if you both feel really strongly, one person is saying what they think is so clear, and the other person is saying what they think is so clear, and the other one can't really hear them. Like they're just two walls, and sometimes it's really hard when you're caught up in the moment, or you're frustrated, or you're angry, or you're so stern in your own convictions. It's really hard for those walls to come down. And I don't think a therapist is there to be a external judge, jury, or executioner or take sides. They are really there to help you translate in a way that is going to land with your partner, or it's going to be in a way that your partner can understand. And I kind of talk about it like she is our translator when we have a really hard moment and can't seem to communicate in our own words. And there's just always this really cool way that she's able to help us see one another and hear one another. And I think it's so, so valuable. And again, you don't need to be on the brink of a breakup or the brink of divorce to go to couples therapy and just check in. You don't even necessarily need to be in an active fight. Sometimes maybe there is a problem that you want to particularly address, and that's really useful. But I think it's just so amazing to have these experts
at the ready, available for all of us to tap into if we are in a place with our partner that's hard. And there's going to be times where it will be hard. And I think some people can look at seeking external support as a sign of weakness. I don't think that's true personally. I totally disagree with that. And I think the strongest couples are always checking in, tuning up. And if you can do that all the time, 100% for your whole life, completely solo without any external support, like that's amazing and congratulations. But I don't think that would be true for everyone. I think that would be really, really rare. And so having that support there for when you need it, it's really, really helpful. So I think some people are aligned in so many ways with their partner, and that's so fantastic. So maybe you'll come up against conflict a little bit less, and that's great. But if you are coming up against communication challenges, or you seem to be having the same fight kind of over and over and over again, it might be minor, and maybe it's not worthy of separating or ending the relationship. Maybe you just need some help getting to the bottom of that or hearing each other. So I think it is a good resource that people can take if, they're thinking this is a challenge for them. If you care about the relationship, I would definitely recommend couples therapy before ending a relationship if it's serious enough to warrant that. But or otherwise, even if you're just in a long, happy, healthy partnership, there's nothing wrong with checking in or making sure that if you're approaching a new phase of life, you've talked about the important things that matter to you both beforehand. Kids, shifting careers or jobs, making a move, whether that's to a new city or a new country, stepping out of the workforce if you are taking time off for a maternity leave or just downshifting your career or retirement. There's so many big life stages that I think can jostle a lot of people and put strain on things that are normally great, that are just natural and are a part of life. So many situations and instances where you can leverage this tool. If you are looking for a great couples therapist, obviously Desiree is someone who is amazing, but DM me and we can talk about other resources that I have available. So thank you so much for listening today, and we'll see you next week.